Hello and welcome to our next episode of Fun with Procurement. We put the cool back into procurement, and as I said before, I don't think it ever left. This episode is how to spice up your specifications. I'm your host, Emma Edwards from the marketing department of 2x2, and this episode is sponsored by our friends over at Freedom Media. Our speakers today are self-confessed procurement geeks, Rob Kissack, CEO and founder of 2x2, and Nathan Swinney, head of category. Hello. So this episode, how to spice up your specifications. At the end of this episode, you'll know how to get your specifications right and make sure nothing is left out and understanding the risks. Rob, Nathan, we're going to start with a very important question today. Do the players or a coach make it a winning team? And I think there's some small football tournament going on at the moment, so maybe you could apply it to that. Rob?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. Hi, Emma. Good to be with you again. I think for me, it's probably a mix of both. As the CEO of 2x2, I think I definitely require a fantastic team around me for us to be able to do the things that we do. Likewise, I coach a football team, under 14s football team, for I was going to say for pleasure. I'm not sure if it's a pleasure. Not sure it's a pleasure for them either. But and definitely, I would say there it's a mix of both the players and the coach. And when we win together. When we lose together. And when we draw, well, we kind of sit back and think, well, at least we didn't lose. Coming from we had a season once where we lost 15 out of 16 games in our first season together, and we've come a bit of a long way to then. And I definitely think that's down to the players.
Brilliant, thank you, Nathan.
Well, Emma, given that Rob is on the call and Rob is my CEO, I'm going to offer the answer that it's all about the coach. It all depends on the coach. The entire success of the team is all down to the coach. So if we fail, it's the coach's fault. It's nothing to do with the players at all.
Brilliant.
If he wasn't on the call, I'd say it was all about the players. Just so you know.
And doesn't matter when he watches the recording later. Okay, let's dive right into our topic. So spicing up your specifications obviously is all about procurement, and I've heard you talk a lot about the 5 rights of procurement. So could you actually explain what they are before we go any further? Nathan, I know this is one of your favourites. Could you start?
Oh, I do love the 5 rights, Emma. And actually, did you know there's actually 7? So officially, for many years, people thought there were just 5 rights of procurement, but there is actually 7. But we'll start with the 5 rights, shall we? So we've got right price, right quality, right quantity, right time, and right place. And basically, the premise of those 5 rights is that if you've addressed in your procurement, in your specification, each of those rights, as it were, that you've addressed, that you know what the product quality is, you know what budget you've got to play with, you know what quantity you know what the right time of delivery is, and where the place is, then theoretically that should address quite a number of the risks around specifications. One thing I will add, Emma, as well, is what is a specification? Because that terminology is often associated with procurement terminology. Well, a specification is simply a description of what it is you're seeking to buy, and it can be quite prescriptive or it can be quite open, but it's a shopping list effectively. So your 5 rights should be a checklist that you use to check whether your specification has addressed those 5 rights. The other 2 rights to make up 7 potentially is right source and right service. So a lot of procurement these days is associated with how we source things. Where do things come from? We think about social value, carbon consumption, the environment. So procurement professionals are now looking at where is the right source for our goods and services, not just in terms of quality, time, price, and quantity, and those important factors. And then right service is actually the more softer side of things, which is, actually, is it delivering? Is it doing what it said? Is the service correct? So all of these things are really useful checkpoints for your specification. And one of the best, most simplest pieces of advice with procurement is, if you've got those those 5 rights within your procurement, your specification, then you won't go too far wrong. So it's always good to check and benchmark your specification against those 5 rights.
Brilliant. Thanks, Nathan. Obviously, Nathan summed it up there, but do you want to add anything about the 5 rights, Rob?
Yeah, I think one of the key aspects when you come into the 5 rights is the level of detail that you need to go into with the specification. And if you use a really simple example of a pen, so if you want to procure a pen, you can use, you say, well, I want a pen. That's your specification. Well, then you start to ask, okay, well, what color pen do you want to have? Well, is it blue or red or black or green? What's it made of? Is it made of plastic? Is it made of metal? How heavy is it? Is the weight of it important? Is the length, the amount of ink that it contains important? It's the classic requirement around specification. There's the classic example with pens is NASA spent millions and millions of pounds developing a pen that you can use in space. And I think when they got up to the kind of International Space Station or whatever, they were there with their kind of £1 million of investment into a pen that they could write on. The Russians were there with a pencil. And it's about what's the right specification. Actually, a pencil works perfectly fine in space. And so you can spend an awful lot of time thinking and over specifying things that actually you can look at something slightly differently and get a better result, or the same or a better result. So looking at applying those 5 rights is really important, and making sure you've got that right level and depth of specification when you're coming to procurement is absolutely important. It's absolutely critical, I think.
Yeah, it's worth spending the time, Emma, and I think that's the important lesson from this. And we talked about in previous podcasts about time being the enemy of procurement in relation to the lack of time. Yeah. And one of the best pieces of advice that we give, and often the shortfall in a lot of clients that we work with, is they don't leave enough time to properly consider their specification. So one of the key things is to make sure that you've properly thought it through, looking at previous contracts, what's worked well, what hasn't. Did you address the 5 rights? Have you looked at what are the key risks that could go wrong with that contract? And it could be everything from a purchase of a new photocopier right through to an outsourced HR and payroll service. The risks are going to be different depending on what you buy, but I think it's really important that you spend time going through that specification, and then you don't do that specification in isolation. You should consult with stakeholders, with relevant people within your organization who are the users, because often the person buying it, the person procuring it isn't always the end user. And therefore, it's important that you speak to the people that are actually needing the product or service. And in some cases, then also talking to the market up front, talking to potential suppliers, not assuming that we know as buyers what it is that we're trying to buy, because we could lose out on something really innovative, or, as Rob mentioned, something really simple, just as a pencil, that could have saved a whole lot of time, effort, and cost. So time is a really important factor when it comes to writing those specifications. But yeah, the 5 rights, you can't go wrong with the 5 rights.
I like that little strap line. You can't go wrong with the 5 rights. Brilliant. You mentioned risk, and how would you address risk in this process and mitigate them as well, Rob?
Yeah, I think one of the points Nathan made then around engaging different stakeholders. I think when you're thinking about procurement, everybody has a different view of what they want the outcome to be quite often, and it's about creating, looking at different people's, or looking through, trying to understand, when you're building a specification, the lens that different people are viewing the solution through, and the kind of the end goal. So everything with procurement starts with your need. So what's your need? And to do that, you need to understand, your need effectively is, what's the end goal? What are you trying to achieve at the end of this process? And if you've got that clear, then it's much easier to build that specification. But that need is built up of different people's lenses of what they think the need is. So if you talk to, if IT systems are a classic example, is when you're trying to implement a new IT system, your operations team might have a lens that they're looking through for what they need. Your finance team will have a lens that they're looking through for what they want from a new IT system. Your procurement guys will have a lens of what they want. Your sales team will have a lens that they're looking for it. And it's, how do you create that overlap of what of the different lenses that then gives you, right, these are the essential things that this new IT system needs to have. These are the things that you'd like it to have. And these are the things that, well, they'd be, the bells and whistles on the side of it if you could really get that. So I think when you're developing your specification, it's very much about identifying your essentials, your needs, your like to haves, and your well, these are the kind of, right down the bottom. But if it did that would be wonderful. But we're not going to. That's not going to be core, because quite often those things those things that aren't necessarily essential. You get somebody who shouts loudest, gets that onto the specification, and suddenly the price goes up by 20% as a result of that. So it's really getting those lenses right. And I think that's a critical risk, is that if you don't get those different lenses, those different views right at the start in building that specification, then the risks of the whole thing unraveling or not delivering what you as an organization want it to can really fall apart.
Yes, definitely.
Depends on the category, Emma, I guess, in terms of what it is you're actually purchasing. So something simple like, buying a ream of paper, naturally the risks around that, with the 5 right, are going to be a much less than if you are, purchasing grounds maintenance services, or I don't know, fire safety checks, or PAP testing. There's lots of different emphasis that you place, and I think the important rule with specifications is you can't apply one specification that fits all categories. There are certain core things around the 5 rights, absolutely, and those do apply to a lot of categories, but the context is all important, and the risks for each of those contexts is really important as well. So things like outsourced services, particularly with things like, as I mentioned, grounds maintenance, health and safety is going to be a huge risk around that with a tractor and a flail mower driving around a school field. So it's important that the specification is really thought through, and using the 5 rights, you look at what are the key risks. And one of the things that we help a lot of clients and customers with is something we call the procurement risk matrix, which is a very straightforward document. But what it does is it allows a buyer to understand across a whole menu of different risks, what are the core risks for this particular procurement, and where have we addressed those in the spec. It's a checklist, basically. Firstly, to flag up what is a key risk, and then secondly, to flag up where in the specification have we addressed that risk, or in the contract terms, or as part of the supplier evaluation. So I think it's important to say it's not a hard and fast, one size fits all rule. Each category is important, and you really need to start that procurement thought process afresh for each contract, each category that you're procuring, and obviously you'll know which inherently are the most important categories to your organization, and where to put your time.
Brilliant. Thank you both. We know how important KPIs and SLAs are within the specification process. Can you just talk us through those and actually explain what the difference is between the two things?
Sure. Well, an SLA is what you agree with the supplier for them to do. So it's a service level agreement, and basically it is a specification of what exactly it is you're expecting from your supplier, and there'll be specific service levels in there, and those can be associated, as mentioned, with the 5 rights, as we say. A KPI is what you measure, so key performance indicators is what you measure the performance of that supplier on, as to whether they've delivered against that service level agreement or not. And both of these tools can be included within a specification. So the supplier is absolutely crystal clear what service levels you're expecting, and they are absolutely crystal clear on what they're going to be measured against and to be held accountable for. And having both of those into a specification, and they don't have to be hugely complicated. We often say, 4 or 5 good KPIs are better than a whole schedule of 20 plus, because again, you've got to consider how much time, effort and cost it's going to be to gather the data, to check whether they're performing against those, and to manage and monitor those. But having something in the specification around that is really important, so that both parties know that within the specification it's absolutely unambiguous as to what is being requested and what is being managed and monitored.
Yeah, I agree, and I think one of the ways in which KPIs and key performance indicators and service level agreements can help, particularly key performance indicators within a contract, is they enable the supplier to understand where you're focusing your priorities in terms of what you want them to focus on in terms of delivery of a contract. So it's also about, if you over KPI a contract, if your key performance indicators on everything in a contract, the supplier's sitting there going, well, what is the priority? What's really what you want me to deliver in this? So KPIs do help to shape the kind of the focus of a supplier, I think, quite well. I think where the big thing for me with KPIs is they also enable you to be able to see where a contract is going wrong. So it's very rare if you've got a contract and somebody's delivering a service over a period of months or years, it's very rare that something suddenly just drops completely and kind of falls off a cliff. If they're delivering a service and suddenly it disappears, that is something major's gone wrong there, and there's probably something that's more broader issues within the kind of that supplies ecosystem of the how that supplier exists and their financial position or whatever that might be. I think with KPIs, they just enable you to be able to say, hang on, that's not quite worked this month. Why is that? And it enables you to nip problems in the bud quite quickly, rather than them kind of evolving. And certainly from a procurement perspective, quite often that's where you add value and you add support in that ongoing contract management piece for whoever the end, your internal stakeholders, your internal customer. They're not necessarily seeing every delivery, and they're not seeing that every 5th delivery there's something wrong with the product, there's an issue with the product. They're just seeing that the next one's coming today and the next one's coming in next week and the next one's coming in. So your ability to be able to stand back a little bit as the procurement person and look at how that contract is performing overall in terms of what you're looking to achieve, that's where your KPIs are absolutely essential, where your service level agreements are absolutely essential, I think.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. Thank you for that. And what is the difference between an input specification and outcome-based specification, Nathan?
Oh, this is one of my favourite topics, I have to say, and something which I'm quite passionate about, Emma, if you can say that and with procurement in the same sentence. So an input specification is prescriptive. So I would like to think that our listeners, when they do their grocery shopping, have a shopping list. And that's a great way of not being sort of tempted by aisle end offers of things that you don't really need, but think, oh, actually, yes, I'll just have 1, 2, 3 of those. Because a shopping list, by its nature, is an input specification. It's an exact list of what you're requiring. You've determined the level of quality, you've determined the quantity, you've said exactly what it is that you require, and there's no ambiguity. It is absolutely unequivocal as to what information is on that list. And so a specification is very, very clear and precise. so that when you come to seek quotations and award a contract with a supplier, there is no sort of ambiguity as to what the expectations are. On the flip side is what we call the outcome-based specification. And this is where, taking the grocery shopping example, is where you say, do you know what, I fancy something nice for tea, and I'll go to the shop to see what there is. So the only thing on your specification for that is the words something nice for tea. You've not actually specified what it is you want, in what quantity, in terms of what ingredients you need. You are looking for an outcome, which is something nice for tea. And so what can often happen there is that you achieve that outcome, and obviously, yeah, you're not prescriptive going into that procurement process as to what exactly it is you want, but you know what the outcome is. So there are advantages and disadvantages for both. Clearly, the input, the shopping list, you're going to get exactly what you ask for. The key thing with that is being absolutely certain of what it is you are procuring. You are effectively placing yourself in the position of the expert. So you know that there is nothing better out there, that is exactly what you want, and that will fulfill the job. So it comes with a high degree of confidence that you are going to get what you ask for. An outcome-based spec basically puts more emphasis on the supplier. So when you go out on an outcome spec, you can say, this is what we want to achieve. We want a new catering service. We're not going to tell you what's on the menus. We're not going to tell you how to deliver it. We just want a really excellent catering service that will deliver nutritional meals and make everybody in the organization happy. So you leave it up to the supplier then to suggest service levels, to suggest specifications as to how they would meet that need. The advantage of that is it allows suppliers, who often are the experts, to innovate, to suggest brilliant ways of delivering a service which could be above and beyond what you could envisage yourself as the buyer. The disadvantage is obviously that you may end up with something potentially that is over-spec'd or under-spec'd. So I think it's about getting the balance right. I think what you have to do with the specification is establish what are the core requirements, what are the core needs, particularly when you're using an outcome-based spec example. So determine what are the showstoppers, the really core things. It must deliver this, it must deliver that. But how you do that is entirely up to you. And in terms of evaluating suppliers and quotes, the input spec you can evaluate mostly on price, because you've determined the quality. You've said exactly what it is you want, when you want it, the 5 rights exactly. So price is all important with that. When it comes to the outcome-based spec, it's more about evaluating quality, less about price. Although what I would recommend with an outcome-based spec is that one of the core requirements is you can put in a ceiling budget to say, whatever solution you come up with, supplier, this is our particular budget that we're working to. And then it allows the supplier some room there to determine exactly what it is they can deliver for that. So both are equally wonderful, and both can be equally used. And there are certain categories that they can be applied to that suit better. But certainly, I think, and it goes back to the earlier point, spicing up your specifications. To do that, you need time, and to look at which category. Is this a category where I think would be better with an input spec, a shopping list? We don't want any room for issues or errors. Or actually, have we got time here to really talk to the market, do a really good procurement, and look at what can the suppliers provide to us? And a great example of that Rob mentioned is IT software systems. It's a fast-moving world out there. It's fast-moving technology. An outcome-based spec is often the best route for that, because you may be working on a specification that's 5 years out of date. So just some examples there, but that's the difference between an outcome and an input spec. And then obviously you can have a hybrid of that, which is your core requirements, which are input, and then desirable requirements, which are outcome-based. Hopefully that explains.
It does. I have learned a lot there. Thanks, Nathan. And I love the shopping list analogy. I just know every time I provide a outcome-based shopping list, I'm always disappointed. But by the back,
indeed, and never never go grocery shopping when you're hungry, Emma. That's an outcome disaster waiting to happen, because you'll invariably buy things that don't fit with you with the diet. As I have
definitely 100%.
often.
Rob, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think input and outcome. I think the point Nathan made at the end there around it's a spectrum. So actually, you've got your kind of pure input spec where it almost becomes like a tick list. Can you do this? 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 And then what's the cost? And as Nathan said, very much then in the evaluation piece, you'll be looking at much more the cost, because there's probably 20 or 30 suppliers that can all deliver that product, right through to where you're looking at much more innovative. Potentially there isn't a product in the marketplace, or it's a product which is emerging in the marketplace, which might change over time. And there you're looking much more at outcome kind of focus specification. But I think there are opportunities to within that spectrum to kind of have various different stages across that. So I used to procure armored cars, for example, and one of the things that in that, when we were buying armored cars, there are some things you want to make sure are very, very input spec related, i.e. does it meet this particular criteria for armoring? Is the steel of a certain thickness? Is it, in terms of the communications within the vehicle, are they the right types of communications that you need? Are they going to work within an armored car? So there are certainly some clear things there that are input related. But then actually there are other things which are more outcome focused, around kind of the way in which the armor is applied, the way in which the actual steel is put within the actual vehicle, the process they use for armoring, that can be much more outcome focused. So I think there is a blend and a mix there, that sometimes with some certain products and services you want to have that blend. So I would say input can be really, really valuable. Outcome based can be really, really valuable. And I think it's about understanding sometimes where the two lie and where the value is of both. And sometimes it sits in the middle of that. But yeah, I think it was a good explanation by Nathan of the two, I think there.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, but from both of you, thank you so much. And thanks for joining us today, for giving that very interesting insight on getting your specifications right first time, starting with the 5 rights, obviously, and ensuring the KPIs and SLAs are included throughout the specification. It's clearly much to consider and to get the best outcome for your business. We have some brilliant resources available to you, free to download if you go to our 2by2.com podcast webpage, and you'll find out how to connect with our speakers there as well. Thanks again, Rob and Nathan, for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed this podcast and found it useful. Don't miss our next episode, and please leave us a review. I've been your host, Emma Edwards. Thanks for joining us. See you next time.